Hey guys, welcome to the Secret History Living in Your Aquarium. Today we're going to be talking about the Holy Grail of bettas. Now, this is the Betta Macrostoma. These are one of the largest betta species known, and they're from the country of Brunei, which is a kind of secluded, secretive monarchy, one of the last true monarchies in the world. And it's on the Malaysian/Indonesian island Borneo. And these fish are found in Malaysian territory, but specifically also in Brunei. They're sometimes called the Jewel of Brunei, or Brunei bettas, Brunei beauties, and they can reach up to a very sizable length as far as bettas go. You know, when you think of the kind that you'd get at Petco or something, those reach 2 or 3 inches at the most. Now these can reach easily over 6. And their mouths are rather large. They will eat whatever can fit inside of it. And currently, you are looking at juveniles. Now, this is a male that we're looking at right here, and he's got more of kind of a bulldog build on his face if you take a look. But as they get older, they color up, and you'll see that the females stay more subdued in tone with the stripes down their side, whereas the males start to get beautiful radial colors on their fins, and kind of stripes going down their body in the exact opposite way, in kind of a horizontal or a vertical way from the way they are now. Now, these fish do require some special care. They can jump very easily, so you want to keep a cover on them. They don't like or need a whole lot of light, so you can keep them in a tank that's fairly dark, low tech. They do happen to like some plants, some cover, places to hide. And one of the most fascinating things about them is they are mouth brooders. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that the male, in this case, will have to eat and get enough protein, so I should be feeding him as they get older more and more protein in order to fatten him up, get his reserves where they need to be, and that protein will carry him through up to 35, even as many as 40 days with eggs in his mouth. And he turns them, and his body gives them just the right kind of immune resistances that they need and things like that. And his gills wash over them, so it's almost like an egg tumbler built in. Plus, they can take their nest with them. Now, they can be pretty territorial, and while the male has the eggs, the female will first lay them, then collect them in her mouth, and then she'll pass them off to him into his mouth. Once they hatch, they'll stay in his mouth, the little babies, and in lieu of a substantial yolk sac, they actually will live in his mouth, off secretions in his mouth and things like that. And we don't fully understand what is needed to raise them in that respect. Oftentimes, males will males will not get pregnant, but they will be holding. You can see his stripes are fading right now too. He's getting more colored up. He's getting a red color, kind of. And he's also opening his mouth and possibly exercising his labyrinth organ system, which we'll talk about in a moment. But the babies will stay in his mouth, and he may not have eaten for, say, 40 days or 15 days on the low end, 40 on the high end, and he will need to eat something. And so when the time comes to release the babies, he opens his mouth, they come out, he kind of follows them for a little while, and then after a short time they're on their own. But they don't build the bubble nests like most of your other bettas do. They are a unique mouth brooder, and that's why they've got that big head, almost like a snake head or a catfish, the size of the head up there in the mouth. And his cheeks can expand to fill and hold he'll look like a chipmunk basically, full of the babies. Now, as I said, he's not eating, so if she gets pregnant and in the sense of they're not fertilized yet, but she lays eggs before he has fertilized them or anything, he will go over there and try to also get those. Even if he just finished having a brood in his mouth a few days ago, they're almost like salmon in that they're just insatiable. There's nothing that can stop them from trying to procreate. And the male will starve to death if that happens, and sometimes you'll have to pull the male out and kind of open up his mouth, kind of force his mouth open. So as for water conditions, they can withstand a slight range, somewhere between 5 pH, which is fairly acidic, and 7, which is neutral. And they have in the wild a tendency to have leaves, tannins, and other debris that falls down into rivers and lakes that they live in down in Malaysia and Indonesia and Brunei. And they enjoy the hiding places that gives them. They like shallow water with, wood, with snags. They like water that turns over at least 5 to 7 times an hour, ideally, but they can stay in pretty stagnant water. And surprisingly, they are a fish with a labyrinth organ. And the labyrinth organ means that they can come to the top and breathe air. Now, there is a slight problem with that in that you need the air to be very humid. That part of the world they live in has very humid air. And especially the babies, as they're exercising this organ, which allows them to gulp air with their mouths. Same with like licorice gouramis, licorice gouramis and several other fish from the region. They need it to be humid so that they don't dry out their mucous membranes and or like the tract that digests, or not digest, but that just like we have an esophagus, they have a soft tissue membrane that is coated in some sort of slime coat. They need to keep that slime coat wet. So the best thing to do once you have some babies swimming around, and oftentimes you'll want to separate them from the parents because the father and mother may eat them just on reflex, is to put saran wrap over the top of a tank and leave a space, put the light above it, and you'll get a very humid little pocket of air for them to breathe. And you can always poke some holes in that, so there's some air exchange, but that for the most part it's capturing that. Now, they also, as far as diet goes, they really like live food. So bloodworms, blackworms, Daphnia, anything like that, brine shrimp, as well as shrimp. In the wild, they eat these small shrimp, these little freshwater crustaceans. And so I've actually put some shrimp in here for them to eat. And they've done a very good job. In a matter of 2 days, they've eaten most of the 20 or so shrimp that I put in here. So they're eating quickly. They're growing quickly for juveniles. And they seem to be paired off pretty well in that they're constantly circling one another and following one another back and forth and not nipping each other, even though the male is physically he's bigger and his mouth is also bigger, even if they were the same size. Now, water temperature, generally if they're going to be in stagnant water that far south in the world, it's going to be very hot, warm, sticky, humid. You can think of rice fields, rice paddies, things like that, like you'd see in, Vietnam or Thailand. The same thing is going on, especially with palm plantations. And so they are surviving in these very dirty ponds, dirty by our standards, full of silt and debris, and they're able to breathe the air from the top of the water, which really allows them to be flexible in where they live. Look at that shrimp. But part of it is that those ponds can get very hot. They can get up to 90 degrees. So ideally you want to keep them on the warmer end of the spectrum, like where you'd keep angelfish or something. But they are also in a part of the world that has quite a few flash floods, and so they are able to tolerate fairly cold water rapidly just flooding into their habitat as well. So they're actually a pretty flexible fish in that regard, and same with the tannins and the TDS. Those things fluctuate when the wet season comes, when the monsoon season comes. Now, he can't see her, and so he wants to know where she went, and he tries to keep an eye on her all the time now. So I think they've kind of imprinted on one another, which is nice for me, so they're not fighting. If you wanted to know whether these are a community fish, it's a kind of, sort of. You probably want to keep them in a 15 or 20 gallon tank at least for a pair. If you're raising more of them, you're probably going to want a larger tank, at least a 20 long with that long footprint, because they can like that shallow water, gives them more space because they don't need the depth of the water column so much. But that's one little tidbit that should help, is using a 20 long, so something like this tank right down here instead of this 15. So the 15 though should do for now, especially while they're still growing. And right now I've got some fish that are at the top of the water. Now these are half beaks, and these are from the same part of the world. You could get little hatchet fish or maybe some killifish. I think that some rocket or clown killifish would work well for the young juvenile fish. But growing up, as they get this size or larger, you don't want anything that fits in their mouth particularly. So those rocket killifish that may be fine for her right now, he is probably getting to the size where he could at least in his head think that he should try to chomp on one of them. So that's when you would maybe stick with like an Austral killifish or hatchet fish or something like that. And likewise, you can put something like a pleco or Corydoras, something like that, something that's a peaceful fish. You could put that in the same tank with them, and it should be no problem. As for little fish, it's hit and miss. They may chase them a bit. They may eat them a bit. They're omnivores. They're opportunivores. But like I said, what they really like are little crustaceans on the bottom of the river and lake floors. And that's becoming a problem in that, like I said, their habitat is getting turned into palm oil plantations. So what they do is they burn all the rainforest and then they bulldoze it. They log it, or they burn it, or they do a combination of both. And the river is no longer shaded. There's no longer logs falling across it to produce these calm little eddies where they get flow and where they feel safer to have babies and to reproduce. And the leaves don't fall into the river anymore. And so the pH increases, meaning that it becomes more basic and less acidic. And they are very vulnerable right now as a species. So just like a lot of species coming out of Indonesia, Malaysia, Borneo, Sumatra, Papua New Guinea, we should keep an eye on that. And if you can, I would suggest avoiding palm oil that is harvested in that region if you have the option and you can afford it. Because it really does cause a lot of issues within this community of creatures. All right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little tour of these as juveniles. That's kind of the little dime store tour. We'll come back soon and let you know when they are spawning and when they're colored up and all sorts of beautiful. And, you know, it's fun. We'll do a feeding because the male really, I mean, he'll be over here pretending like he's moving as slow as can be, and he'll just dart and just nail a shrimp or bloodworms or whatever it may be. They can be very aggressive, and once they have their babies in the mouth, they're also very, as a team, very defensive, and they'll take an area and kind of make it theirs. And so it's a very interesting behavior to watch. And they can reproduce anywhere from, 30 eggs or fish all the way up to, almost 100 or so. So they're very interesting when they hatch. They're larval, and so they'll fall to the ground and they won't be able to swim, but dad can pick them up, put them back in his mouth, or he can stick them with mucus to like little logs or leaves or whatnot, and then kind of leave them there and come back and pick them back up, which is a trick that a lot of fish use, which is kind of cool when you see it. All right, guys, give me a thumbs up if this was helpful, if this was interesting, and, if it wasn't, then, give me a thumbs down. That's fine. And I will talk to you guys next time. Be sure to take care of your critters, take care of the people around you, and of course take care of yourself, because if you don't, you can't do the other two, and what's the point in any of it? So take care of yourself as well, and I think if we all do that and take care of the world around us, it will be a much better place. I'll talk to you guys later. Good night.